Today is Thursday, November 21st, 2013. Wow. Man.
Welcome to the present moment.
All right. So I'm here with Melissa Cantrelle talking about whatever we talk about, right?
A little bit of everything.
So what's the first item on our to-do list here?
All right. First item is all things certification and testing, and is that product really clean, organic, good for you, free of radiation, blah, 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 blah. All that.
Yeah, so all that. So the whole issue of certification. So the first thing is... I hate to break the news to people, but in the packaging world, like people like us that actually buy ingredients and formulate them into products and package them, we all laugh about the entire organic certification process because it's just a criminal activity at this point. It used to be that the way it worked was you would send some product to the actual U.S. government, and they would actually test it. Some people still think that's the way it is, but that's not the way it is. So if you'd like to become a certifier, you can pay, I don't know what the fee is, but anybody can pay a fee to the government and become a organic certifier.
Wow.
I don't know if you realize that or not.
And they just pay a fee. They don't have to get checked out by the government. They just...
Well, I mean, there's some cursory checking, but it's really all about money. So here's some of the things that I found out along my travels over the last decade of working with product packaging. One thing I found was we were buying cacao from a company that was certified organic, and I asked them how much. I talked with them and I asked them how much product they were shipping, and then I went and looked on the deed to their property to see how many acres they had under cultivation. And they were selling 6 times more cacao than they could grow. Yeah. And so I called them and I said, hey, it looks to me like if I'm doing the math here on, based on the hectare space you've got, you're selling more cacao than you're growing. He said, oh yeah. So what we do is whenever we run out of cacao and we have orders, we just go next door to the next farmer. And then the next farmer, and the next farmer. And so it's kind of like when you buy, if you look at the exports for lavender oil in France, there's twice as much lavender oil shipped as the country can manufacture. Twice as much. And I mean, we're talking about, thousands and thousands of metric tons of lavender oil. Wow. So where's the rest of it?
But it's all labeled French lavender.
Yeah. So the question is, where does the rest of it come from? And it's a simple answer. It's cut with petroleum.
Jeez.
So they mix oil with it.
Wow.
And so, that's the thing. That's why we get our oils from, places that don't come from France, because it's just a criminal activity there. Same way with salt. I mean, the reason that there's gray salt from France is because they harvest it out of the coast of Brittany, France, which is on the English Channel. One of the most horrendously polluted areas of the world. You got, tankers going through there leaking, and you got oil platforms all up and down the North Sea that all goes through there. And sometimes the French salt ministry has to actually shut down. The most recent time was 5 or 6 years ago. They shut down salt exports from France for 9 months. Because
it was so polluted?
Well, it's difficult to ship product that has big globs of oil in it and try to pass that off as a health food.
You got to disperse it a little more.
You got to disperse the oil so it's gray. You can't have big black hunks of oil in there, or people start scratching their heads saying, well, maybe this ain't such a good thing to eat. Wow. So another couple of examples are the nori that we buy. Mm-hmm. I asked them, what's the difference between the organic and the non-organic? And the person told me, well, it's simple. We have where we grow the nori for the conventional and, one part of the plant, or grow and process it. It's harvested and then processed. And then we take the exact same harvest that we've gotten out of the ocean and run it through the other side of the plant. The only difference between the two sides of the plant is the guys that give us the certified organic certification come by and stick a meter in the water every once in a while to say that the water doesn't have organophosphates in it. And
they only do that on one side?
Pardon me?
They only stick that meter in on one side, or?
Yeah, because them coming around to manage the paperwork for that one guy to come around and the audit trail, the product marks up 40%.
Wow.
So we don't buy organic nori, and it's the same as organic nori. It's the exact same product, run down the same processing plant, just one side has got the paperwork and the other side doesn't.
Wow.
And another example is hemp seeds from Canada. There's no spraying of crap on fields up there because during the winter it gets cold and everything dies.
And hemp is like one of those crops that needs the least, if no pesticide anyway.
You don't need water, fertilizer, and nothing can get through the hemp fiber. No, I mean, it's really, there's never been like a hemp blight, some, bug come and eat it. And I just found out recently. So, I was talking with the hemp people recently and I said, what's the difference between the organic and then the conventional? And they got the checklist, and here's all the same checklist on both sides. And you get down to organic certification audit trail. Checklist on this side, no checklist on this side. So 40% more for the audit trail.
Wow.
So the point with all this is, and the reason that we came up with our, what we call certified pristine, is that it's to differentiate ourselves from participating in the entire certified organic criminal activity. Mm-hmm. And I say criminal because it is criminal. I mean, it's just crazy. The whole thing is crazy. And anyway, we looked into managing the paperwork, and it looked like it would drive our prices up 40 to 50% just to maintain the paperwork.
And are there some products, like some superfoods in particular, that it is important that it be organic?
Well, not really, because, for example, we'll take cacao, for example.
Yeah.
There's no spraying of cacao because it pretty much grows wild. I mean, cacao grows like a weed. Same thing with Brazil nuts. In fact, there's never been a successfully cultivated Brazil nut orchard. You have to go out.
Always wild.
You got to go to the jungle, baby, and get them nuts off the ground or tree, however they do. I choose to know. Let's see.
Like I've seen those lists of the 12 most contaminated fruits that you want to make sure you buy organic, but in my mind, those are all domesticated.
Yeah.
Grown in the U.S., poor soil potentially to begin with.
For example,
known to have a lot of pesticides.
Yeah, for example, things like we buy our greens that are grown in this country and strawberries and blueberries organic, because they actually are. If somebody goes and spot tests a bunch of strawberries that are supposed to be organic in this country, and they got a bunch of organophosphates on them, somebody's going to go to jail. If it's coming from a foreign country, there's no recourse. So, for example, a good example is Whole Foods got busted here about 6 months ago for they were importing some like green peas or green beans or some kind of veggie line from that was packaged in China. Uh-huh. And they had this goofy symbol on there that looked kind of like the USDA symbol. Huh. And they got busted and had to bounce back all the labeling because it wasn't actually organic, and it was just jam-packed full of organophosphates. And somebody, sent some to a lab, and they got in some serious trouble. So for our part, what we do is we buy the cleanest products and ingredients we can from all over the world. Some of them actually have, most of our products have their own certified organic supposed paperwork. But for me to put certified organic on my products, that means I have to audit my process, and I have to audit every single process of every ingredient from every vendor. Yeah. And, the bottom line is that, it really, in most cases, it's meaningless and a lie. Mm-hmm. And for domestically grown, crops grown in the U.S., it's very useful to buy organic in things like strawberries and blueberries and greens that are porous and can accumulate.
Right, and apples too. I've heard apples are some of the most sprayed.
Yeah, we're very conscientious about buying organic. It's funny, we buy organic in this country because there's recourse. People can go to jail. There's no recourse overseas.
And it sounds like it comes back to, again, know your supplier, develop a relationship with them that you can trust. I mean, that's one of the things that I've loved about working with you is you've done all this research. You know the people that you're getting the products from. You have a sensitive system yourself, so you can tell when there's something in there that isn't talked about, right, or isn't in the paperwork. And for us individually too, to develop that sensitivity within ourselves to eat as high a quality as possible. Right. So that you can start to taste, there's something in there that's not, on the label.
Well, and to use common sense too. So for a common sense use would be like with Thai coconuts. Mm-hmm. Thai coconuts aren't sprayed in the field with anything. Right. Because in that area of the world, there's no bugs that can get through the shell. In Brazil, there are bugs that they can bore all the way through the hull. Wow. So the coconuts in Brazil are sprayed. The coconuts from Thailand are soaked in a fungicide that's very similar to formaldehyde. And it doesn't matter to us because we don't chew on the outside of the thing.
Of the coconut shell,
Yeah, we, hack it open with a machete, and the likelihood of anything getting through that hard shell around the meat and water of a coconut, I've never tasted any off flavor in any coconut I've ever had. Yeah. In any place, in South America or Hawaii or from Thailand. So, there's common sense approaches to, thinking through. I mean, sometimes it doesn't matter. Like if I was in Brazil, I wouldn't have any challenge eating a coconut there because I would hack into it. There's not any, what they sprayed is on the outside fiber of the, soaked into the porous material. It's not passed through the hull.
And you just look for bugs that bored through.
Yeah. And you can, I mean, if you open a coconut and if it tastes funny, I don't eat it.
Right.
Right. Because usually it's fermented. I've never, to my knowledge, tasted any kind of chemical in the water.
Yeah. So I think some of the scare and the drive for certification and having testing is there's so many unseen things being put in food. The whole GMO thing of genetically modified food, and you don't know. Like maybe after a year of eating genetically modified corn, you start to feel a little funny, depending on your system. And so it seems almost like it's a crutch for people to use of if I have this certification on there, then I can trust it. Rather than doing a little bit of work to, check into the quality and be in tune with your body.
Right. Even the whole GMO thing, I mean, everything on the planet at this point is GMO because there's wind. You can't say that this field is GMO and this one's not because the wind blows all over the place. Now, the good news is, which nobody ever talks about, is the whole GMO industry is only probably 3 to 4 crops away from complete demise. Mm-hmm. And the way it works is to create a genetically modified, like some kind of random strawberry plant that's got a fish gene in it to keep it from freezing, for example, is a good example. Or what we think of as corn ain't really corn. You can't, there ain't no place in the world that corn grows like that. Corn is a grass.
Right.
And so, every year the crops have to be, I mean, they aren't genetically modified with another like animal genes, but they're genetically modified in the sense that they are artificially grown or manufactured in the lab. When a person goes to plant corn in the ground, they don't go buy seed that grew off another corn plant, because if they did that, they'd get grass. They have to go buy the corn from a lab that manufactured the corn, the seed. So it's a really interesting thing. So the good news is that the whole GMO and adulterated crop industry has a massive carbon footprint. It takes lots and lots and lots of oil to power that entire machine. So things like manufacturing Roundup and Roundup crops that match Roundup. There will come a day when oil is so expensive or the dollar is so depressed that these companies simply won't be able to manufacture any of their junk. And what will happen...
I like that view.
Pardon me?
I like that view.
Yeah. Well,
I hadn't thought of it that way.
And the good news is that if you plant, for example, like you take Monsanto compatible wheat, we'll say as an example, and you plant that seed in the ground, you spray it with Roundup, then the next year, if you don't have any wheat to plant, if you can't afford the wheat or the Roundup, or it's all gone, Monsanto's collapsed, then what will happen is about something like between 3 to 10% of the crop will actually revert. In other words, it'll reverse back to a more natural strain. And then the next year, if you just let that go to seed, the next year the same thing will happen except more. And so after about a 3 to 4 crop rotation, you've got back almost 80% or better, usually is the numbers I've read, of your yield, the same as before you started with the GMO nonsense.
Yeah.
So the good news is that eventually, all this stuff is going to collapse because it costs, massive amounts of energy to run it. And there'll come a point where people will say, well, I got to run my car and I got to run my lights, or I can pay these criminals at Monsanto to poison me. It's kind of like what happened in India. Like they had the Green Revolution and Monsanto ruined the entire ecosystem there by all their junk, pumping all their junk into the environment, all their GMO'd seeds and insecticides. And the entire industry collapsed there because it got so expensive, nobody could buy the stuff, and the Indian government finally basically just ran them out of the country. The same thing's happening in Brazil right now. I haven't checked up on the court case, but the Brazilian government was suing Monsanto.
Awesome.
So, and in fact, I suspect somebody here in the Patriot Act, there's a clause in there that talks about, basically you can be renditioned and sent to Gitmo to get your waterboarding if you mess around with the food chain. And so in my mind, Monsanto is the worst offender of destroying our food chain because, if your crop, if you can't buy seed any place except them and they go out of business, then the entire food chain collapses for 3 or 4 years. And so all those guys should be, lined up against the wall and shot, or, waterboarded, or at the very least a public pillory where we get to throw rotten Monsanto tomatoes at their faces. I apologize. I'm getting wound up here. I better rein it in.
Let's take it back to certification.
Okay.
So how about one of the pieces that this has come up around is concerns about irradiated food from Fukushima.
Oh, okay.
And so how do you know? So the question that has come up is from a customer concerned about, like, they want to get the Dulce seaweed because that's so great for getting the right kind of iodine in your thyroid and blocking the irradiated iodine.
Right.
But they're concerned, like, well, how do I know that this Dulce isn't irradiated, that I'm not still getting irradiated iodine in it?
Well, so the easy thing to do is, let's see, I'm looking for Europe, Australia, South America. Oh, I guess there's so little radiation. So here's the first way to answer that is the first thing you have to do is you just look at the radiation levels where the products are grown. I mean, it's common sense, right? And so if we look at, I'll send you the link here. It's radiationnetwork.com. Now, what radiationnetwork.com is it's pretty cool. It's basically a grassroots effort where people run Geiger counters in their local area and send the data back to Radiation Network. Mm-hmm. So you can look around the world. For example, you can look in Japan right now, and right now there's basically no discernible radiation levels. There's a little bit up north of where Fukushima was. So basically that means that the radiation is maybe very concentrated in Fukushima, but no other place anywhere even near it is registering any high levels of radiation. In fact, Japan registers less than most places in the U.S.
Wow. The
worst place that you could possibly live is at high altitude in Colorado, which is the highest. Oh, it looks like around you on the border of Oregon and California is pretty high too.
Interesting.
So the first thing is, before you even have the conversation, is this product got radiation effect, is you look where it's growing and see what the effect is. Like, there's not even enough radiation to register in the waters off Nova Scotia where the dulse is harvested. So it's not an issue.
Yeah, right. So it's not like you have to go pay a bunch of fees to have it tested when you can use common sense and see there's nothing there.
Yeah, I wouldn't care. Now, if I was buying tomatoes in Colorado, I'd think twice before I ate them. In fact, looking at the radiation map, I'd think twice before I lived in Colorado. Because it literally has the highest of any place in the country.
Wow.
And I suspect, I've had this conversation with people before, is why is Colorado, which, I don't even think there's any nuclear facilities any place near Colorado. So why is the level so high? And it may be because, the mountain range that goes through the center of the U.S., you've got wind currents that blow both ways, and they accumulate and precipitate out the debris from all over the world, which happens to contain some radioactive isotopes.
Right. Interesting.
So,
have you've watched that website before? Does it seem to change a lot?
It does, and in general, there were measurable levels of radiation all over Japan when Fukushima occurred, but they were nothing close to what's in the U.S.
Yeah.
In fact, you'd be way better off if you're concerned about radiation. You should pack your stuff today and move to Japan. You shouldn't live in this country. Now, not according to the data. See, this is where people they make the mistake of watching the news and thinking that's something that's beneficial to them instead of looking at hard data. When you look at hard data, then you can tell exactly what's going on. Oh, so the map just refreshed here, and one point in Colorado just went from 42 to 50 in one refresh cycle. Wow, that's intense.
Interesting. Maybe it's raining.
Oh, I guess there are some nuclear sites in Colorado. So, maybe there's a leaky nuclear site around there or something. You should take your Geiger counter immediately to the nuclear site near you and send your data back to Radiation Network to bust those guys.
Right. Yeah. Well, actually, I really love what you're saying there because, it's this whole certification question. It feels kind of like that old stereotypical, particularly American pattern of the government will take care of it for me. Like somebody else tell me if it's good and test it and certify it rather than doing the common sense and finding out for yourself.
Yeah. We use that philosophy in a way, and here's the way we use that philosophy is, first off, I don't believe anybody that has power ascribed to them. That includes clergymen, government, anybody that, like a doctor, that, calls himself an expert, that has no scientific basis in calling themselves an expert. Like the idea that the government can manage finances for our country is ludicrous because it's, they've proven, the data says they're all idiots. I don't know how else to say it. That's the best proof of that here recently is the Obamacare nonsense, because what's happened is because of the rules in place, all the large companies, the reason Obamacare exists is for large companies because they get to reclassify all their employees as part-time, so they get rid of not only their health care, but all their benefits.
Wow.
And then that drives all the insurance companies that were serving those people out of business. Mm-hmm. So the only insurance companies that are left are with the government.
Right.
And so, to me, I look at this and I'm like, well, it's just, Obama making the poor people even poorer and no doubt getting some kickbacks along the way. So that's an example of, an authority. I mean, you could take your advice from authorities, but I wouldn't recommend it. Here's the way we use that. So, for example, when I tested, when I got a hold of the test results and saw that the gray in salt from Britain was full of oil, that was the last day I sold that salt. So that's an important thing to know that's my commitment, because if I don't eat it, I don't sell it.
Right.
And I wasn't going to eat that junk. I took it out. In fact, I wouldn't even put that on my garden because it had petroleum. I just threw it all. Everything we had, we disposed of. We incinerated. Yeah. It went, gone.
Yeah.
And so then what I did was I did some more research, and I found that the Britain salt had oil in it. All the pink salt I could find was full of nickel, which is far more toxic than mercury. So that was no good. And so I called around and found a company that had actually, the reason there's nickel in salt is because all the salt is ground on nickel grinders, and the nickel is softer than the salt, so you get nickel dust in it. So what I did is I called around for quite a long time. And the question I would ask is not, is your salt good? Or does your salt have nickel in it? Those are stupid questions because, they're questions that can be easily lied about. You have to ask a question that only an expert knows the answer to. So my question was, what is the manufacturer and the model number of the grinder your salt is ground on? And I called around for, I wish I had a diary entry. I'm thinking better part of a couple of years. Maybe it wasn't that long, but it seemed like that long. Nobody could ever tell me. In fact, most people couldn't even tell me what the actual source was because they were buying through brokers after brokers after brokers.
Wow.
And I finally called up this one place, and I started calling at like 7 o'clock in the morning, whatever the company's time was, so I could maybe catch an owner there. And sure enough, I caught an owner this morning. And I said, what's the manufacturer model number of my store? And I expected, I don't know. And instead what I got was she told me the manufacturer model number. And I said, now, wait a minute. How the heck do you know that? She said, well, because all the salt grinders in that area of the world are nickel, and they're softer than salt, and so you end up with nickel dust. I said, okay, well, so how do you know? He said, well, we had to ship a stainless grinder over there. We paid to ship. We bought a grinder, shipped over there. They grind our salt on that grinder. That's where we buy our salt from. So that's the way you use experts, is you use critical thinking to come up with a question that only somebody that is really truthful knows the answer to.
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's not about, is it certified? Is it this? Is it that? But really, what are you after? Like the question that the customer had was like, is the dulse irradiated? Well, look at Radiation Network. The dulse is coming from Nova Scotia. There's low radiation. So no.
Right. And do you know where this customer lives?
You don't need a test.
Do you know what's California? Yeah. So she should immediately move out of California, which has got some serious nuclear radiation, to where the dulse is, and she'd be better off.
Right.
So she can, sit up off the coast of Nova Scotia and eat dulse, and she'll be way healthier than being in California.
And barring moving, then eat the dulse that comes from Nova Scotia.
Yeah, and so if you are living in a high radiation site, like around the Sacramento, San Jose, there's a pretty high accumulation, especially if I were living in that area. I would be eating salt or seaweed on a daily basis, salt on a daily basis, and also maybe even taking those little kelp dulse powder capsules. Mm-hmm. Just, carry some in through your day and just eat one every, 4, 5, 6 hours, couple, 4 times a day. And that'll keep your system permeated with all that iodine. So the reason that all those seaweeds help is your thyroid and parathyroid and adrenals to a certain amount pick up iodine. They run on iodine. And so whatever iodine is in your system, that's what gets absorbed. So if it's radioactive iodine, that it gets absorbed. And those particular glands are very sensitive to destruction or deterioration by radiation. So the way you protect yourself is you ingest high levels of iodine, and so your iodine reserves stay high in your thyroid, parathyroid, and adrenals, and there's just no absorption of anything else. Because the accumulation of, the iodine you get from nuclear fallout out of, plants in that area, the only way you'd absorb any of that is if you're really deficient in iodine. Mm. So that's one of the nascent iodine, that liquid aqueous suspension iodine you can buy. I wouldn't recommend it on a daily basis, but we keep some of that here. So if there was like a nuclear explosion, then we'd take some of that to load on iodine.
Cool.
So, yeah.
Good tips.
Good stuff. Well, that was an easy one, yeah.
That was an easy one, huh? Awesome.